Hey everyone, here we are, Module 7. A couple things I want to apologize for real quick. Number one, you're probably going to hear some construction stuff. Can't control it, so I apologize for that. Also, I apologize for my scratchy voice. Hopefully you can bear with me with that one. Can't really control that. So let's get to our film. The film we're going to be watching is Andrei Tarkovsky's The Sacrifice. And we're going to talk about Tarkovsky as well as The Sacrifice, okay? Kind of like how we talked about Kurosawa and his film Ran, okay? So Tarkovsky was a Russian filmmaker. He was a director, a screenwriter, and a film theorist. And so you might be saying, okay, well, what's a film theorist? It's an academic, number one, right? And they start by questioning the essential attributes of motion picture, which provide them a conceptual framework for understanding film's relationship to reality. So there's a whole bunch going on there, right? Number one, it's way above my head. It's a little bit beyond being like a film critic or film critical analysis, which is kind of what we're doing here. Him being a film theorist drives what he wants to do as a filmmaker. So you kind of have to understand that, right? And one of the reasons I'm giving you so much information on Tarkovsky, and then we're going to talk about the film, is I want you to have a clear understanding of what it is you're going to be watching, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. He studied film in Moscow. He only directed 7 feature films in his career, right? Kurosawa, from last module, he directed 30 films in his career, right? So 5 of his films were done in Russia, and then he had some creative differences with the country. And so he left. He made one film out of Italy called Nostalgia, and then he made a film in Sweden, which is The Sacrifice, which is the film we're watching. And he passed away shortly after this film, The Sacrifice, was completed. Okay, things to understand about Tarkovsky and the way he works and the way he tells stories. His stories often feel very ponderous and literary. Okay, so what does that mean? Sometimes his work feels like watching poetry, right? And you're thinking, okay, poetry. You may not even like poetry, right? It may be difficult to understand what poetry is even saying sometimes. I've run into that myself, right? So understand that's what he does from a visual standpoint. So you're going to have to be paying attention to the work. It's not just, if you pick up your phone and try to look at something, whatever, you're going to miss something and you're going to be lost when you look back up, okay? His characters are often pondering over religious themes and issues regarding faith. That's something that it happens in a lot of his films. In this particular film, you're going to deal with that issue, or you'll see that theme kind of come up in this film as well, okay? Some of the reoccurring motifs that you'll see in a lot of his work would be things like dreams and dealing with memories, dealing with childhood. One that seems like, wait, where did this come from, out of left field? Raining indoors, running water accompanied by fire, reflections, and then levitation, another one that comes out of left field. But you're going to see levitation in The Sacrifice. You're going to see dreams or memory in this one. You'll see a little bit about childhood. There's a child in the film. And then we definitely see water near fire in this particular one as well. So a lot of those motifs that he uses, you're going to see them in this particular work. Tarkovsky, again, being a theorist, he created or devised a theory of cinema, and he wrote a book called Sculpting of Time, okay? So his theory in gist, okay, this is just kind of a paraphrase of his theory, is that the unique characteristics of cinema as a medium was to take our experience of time and alter it, okay? So that's his kind of perception of cinema. So we don't watch cinema real time. Like, we don't just watch everything happening out, right? And so he thinks that's manipulative, and it alters time, and it alters perception of it, okay? And so he went about making movies, or wanted to do something and tell his stories just a little bit different, okay? And so he is another filmmaker who used a long take with fewer cuts, right? We watched Breathless way back, a couple weeks back, right? That film used a longer take to a certain degree. In Ran from last week, they used a long take, and even a little bit longer clip than Breathless did. Now, Tarkovsky was a big fan of Kurosawa, and so the long take is something that he borrowed from Kurosawa. Now, by using the long take and fewer cuts in his films, he aimed to give the viewer a sense of time passing, time lost, and the relationship of one moment in time to the next moment in time. Like, that was his goal as a filmmaker, right? So again, this film is going to feel like it's a slow burn. It's the slowest moving movie I would bet that you will ever watch in your life. Okay, so you just have to be ready for that. Okay, it's not going to be moving quickly, right? And part of that is it's by design, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, he explored this theory of his through 5 of his films, his first 5 films. And then his last 2 films, which are Nostalgia, the one made in Italy, and then Sacrifice, the one made in Sweden, he went for a little bit different storytelling device. He wanted to concentrate on an action happening in one place within the span of one single day. And that's kind of what you're going to see here in The Sacrifice, okay? So now talking about the film, okay? This is art, not entertainment. That's what a film critic said about Tarkovsky's work and The Sacrifice. So what does that mean, right? This isn't made to be the kind of film that you just go hang out, grab some popcorn, hang out with your friends on a Friday night, and you go watch The Sacrifice. It's not that type of movie. This is a piece of artwork that needs to be kind of explored and examined, very similar to when you go to like a museum and look at a painting, or go to a photo gallery and look at classic photography or something like that, okay? So just understand, again, what we're starting to watch here. This will be, again, the slowest film that you watch, the toughest to kind of comprehend and understand that we watch all course long, okay? One other critic said that this is a stunningly beautiful film and impossible to sit through. Okay, so just to give you an idea about what's going on. It does take a little bit to sit through this film, but please just sit back, pay attention, take it all in, try to understand. And again, we're going to get into kind of some of the reasons why this film might be a little bit tougher to kind of figure all out, right? The basic plot is a middle-aged intellectual who attempts to bargain with God to stop an impending nuclear holocaust. Okay, so that's a lot to take in just right there. Basically, in a nutshell, you have this father, this patriarch, and it's his birthday weekend. And he lives on this little peninsula out in the middle of rural nowhere, right, in Sweden. And he has some friends coming over to visit for his birthday, right? And during this kind of get-together, something pops up on the TV, on the news, and it talks about the fact that something went wrong, but they never really allude to what it was. And basically, World War III has started, and there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, and you don't have much time. Doesn't matter where you go. Just stay with your family and enjoy the time that you have. And everybody kind of freaks out about this whole thing, and that's what starts kind of the madness of the movie, right? So that's the basic plot. So other things to kind of understand about this is that the dialogue in the film sometimes feels like poetry. Like you're listening to these people talk and you're like, what did they just say? Like, I don't know. You have to go back and kind of listen to that again. And early on, there's some monologues that the dad has that also feel very much like you're listening to poetry. Like you gotta kind of pay attention to kind of figure out what he's trying to get to and what he's trying to say. There's a little boy in the film, they call him Little Man. He doesn't speak for most of the movie, and it's because he had some kind of a throat surgery or something, and so he can't really talk. And so when the dad's hanging out with him at the beginning of the movie, it's just the dad kind of talking and giving a little speech kind of thing, right? So think about that. You do need to pay attention to the dialogue to grasp what's being said. And it's very slow moving by design, right? It wasn't like the guy just did this because he didn't know what he was doing. The slow burn of this film is by design for sure. So basically what I said is they're all waiting for this impending nuclear holocaust, right? And so the idea here is waiting for something that you know is going to come without knowing when it's going to hit you. That'll weigh on you, right? That can cause you some insanity, just that alone. Okay, so that's the kind of purpose behind the idea of the slow burn of this particular film. Okay, so just understand that it is by design, it is purposeful, and it's part of the narrative and how this film is getting told by Tarkovsky. So cinematography is the next thing we're going to talk about here. Just by looking at this image, you can see that's clean. It's not too flashy. And it's very subtle and natural, right? So, and it's also symmetrical. You see a lot of symmetry in the composition there as well, okay? So that's what we're going to be talking a lot about when we're talking about the cinematography. The cinematographer, the person who shot the movie, was a guy named Sven Nykvist. He was a Swedish or a Scandinavian, I don't know if he's from Sweden, cinematographer, world-renowned, won Academy Awards, won awards all over the world, very highly regarded cinematographer. And this particular movie, I would say, fits under a category of what you would call clean naturalism. Now, there's two kind of philosophies behind cinematography in general, right? Two big kind of philosophies. One is naturalism. The other one is something called pictorialism. Okay, so naturalism is just trying to photograph what's there and not make it too flashy. Just trying to capture the natural beauty of what's in front of you. And then pictorialism is to make it more cinematic. See what you see in front of you and then make it more cinematic, which is what a lot of filmmaking is. There isn't a lot of films that come out that are very natural in their look. This film is very natural in its look. The light in Sweden, like the physical actual light in Sweden, seems to be a little bit softer than what we get here in the United States. And so it photographs really well. It definitely comes through in this movie. It's a very beautiful looking film, and just the light just feels very soft all the time. Okay. Again, you're going to see a lot of symmetry in the composition. So look for, symmetry being like, even on this side, very balanced from both sides of the composition. Another thing you're going to see a lot of is these reflections. It's one of the motifs that he uses a lot. Sometimes you'll see the camera like pan over. You'll be looking at somebody and then it pans over and then you see their reflection and then you see them in a different way by looking at them in this reflection, right? And it's very reflective for the character a lot of times too in that particular moment. So look for these reflections that you'll see. It happens 4 or 5 or 6 times over the course of the movie that I can recall. Movement. It's very slow and calculated movement in this particular film. Okay, there's no handheld shakiness. There's none of that in this film. Okay, they also do, again, going back to the long takes and very few cuts. The film starts off with what you call a oneer. Okay, now a oneer is shooting an entire scene with one shot, and it's a moving shot usually. And in this particular case, it is. The opening shot of this scene, they say it's 9 minutes long. I looked at it and it was like 15 minutes long before you get to a cut. 15 minutes long of one shot. Okay? That's a oneer. Okay, and it sets you up for kind of the slow burn that you're about to get into, where I think you're 28 minutes in before you even see the second cut. So again, a lot of long takes. So there's a oneer, which is one scene that takes place in one shot with a moving camera. And then there's also these things that he uses a lot. They're called a moving master. Now, a moving master is also a moving shot. That's a wider shot of the whole scene kind of thing. But a moving master, they will cut in and out of, like to a close-up of somebody or cut to something, and then they'll come back to that master shot and keep it moving. So both of those techniques being used, and it's part of what makes it kind of that slow-moving thing, is that we don't make a lot of cuts. Okay, but they're fantastic shots, very calculated, very controlled move. It's very difficult to do as a camera operator to do shots like that. Very impressive work by far. The other thing that they do in this movie that should be noted, and you'll see it as you watch the movie, is they go from this being a color film to it being very desaturated, almost like they're sucking the color out of it, right? And obviously that was by design. And the whole idea behind it, or kind of the rationale of it, is that this desaturation in color, this change in color, reflected the sheer lifelessness of war. Like that's the thing that Tarkovsky wanted everybody to take away from it, okay? So it's a very abstract thing. Again, the change in color reflects the sheer lifelessness of war. There's nothing that gets said in the dialogue. There's nothing that kind of leads you that direction. It's this like abstract concept that from looking at the whole movie, you're supposed to extrapolate out of the storytelling, okay? So again, I'm just giving you an idea about what it is we're going to be watching. It's very, very interesting film to look at. So let's move on. Next up, well, this is just an example of how the film moves, right? There's the saturated up top there, right? And then the desaturated. They don't quite make it black and white. They drop about 60%, 70% of the color out. So there's still a little bit of color in it, and it kind of comes and goes. Like they're gonna desaturate it. By the time we get back to the end of the movie, we're back to full color again. So just something to look for as we watch the rest of the film. So here we are. This shot here, I wanted to go through this. This is the last thing, and I wanted to talk about cinematography before we move on to the next thing. At some point in the film, you see this house burning. Okay, and down there there's a shot of the house, and then there's a shot of the crew kind of filming this burning house. This house was built for the film on this piece of land, and the whole idea was that this house was going to get burned down. This is where they shot the film, the interiors and everything as well, right? So this had to be the last thing they shot of the whole entire movie. So they go to shoot this, and the cinematographer is telling the director, we need to set up multiple cameras, because if something goes wrong or anything, whatever, we want to make sure that we photograph this house burning down. And Tarkovsky's like, no, I want to shoot it with one camera. And big argument going back and forth. And that's how they ended up shooting it, one camera. So they light this house on fire. They start to shoot. Camera's on a dolly. It's moving. It's a moving shot. And the camera jams. And it doesn't shoot the whole house burning down. Just catches the beginning of it. They can't get the jammed film unjammed and get the film reloaded enough, and the house burns to the ground, and they didn't capture it. So they had to rebuild the house from scratch to burn it down again for this movie. Okay? So they redid all of that. Tarkovsky eventually agreed to have two cameras shoot it. And they lit it up on fire again, shot it again with the two cameras. The take you see in the film, my understanding is that's the second camera, because something went wrong with the other camera, and they managed to get it on the second one. So the fact that that's what they went through to shoot this and get this sequence just the way that he wanted, that's like the heart of a filmmaker right there. Like, they're gonna do whatever it takes to get the shot done the way they want to get it done. Okay, a lot of people put a lot of symbolism in this shot as well. It's talked about a lot. There's plenty of articles you can go find on Tarkovsky, and he will say, I don't put symbolism in my movies like that. Like, nothing means nothing. Like, people want to know, why does he put water next to fire all the time? Or why does he do this levitation thing? And he's like, it's how I want to tell the story. There is no symbolic gesture about it. It's whatever. But people talk about it, right? And what I find interesting about this image is, right, so we're dealing with this film about this nuclear holocaust, and these people can do nothing to stop it, and they just got to kind of wait for their demise. And one of the things I find interesting about this shot is the idea that you got this beautiful house burning down, and it's surrounded by water. There's like water behind it, water on a lake or wherever it's at. There's water all around, and they don't have the ability to access that water to then put out the fire, right? They have no way to kind of get it all there and onto the house. And so I think that's pretty, there's some deeper meaning there when it comes to the overall story and how it all plays out. So that may not be his intent, but it's just kind of how I read it. And that's one of the things you want to do with cinema is, can you pull out like ideas and meanings, and what does it mean to you? That's most important when it comes to art in general, is what does it mean to you, and how does it affect you, right? Sometimes it matters what the filmmaker's intent is, but a lot of times it's just your personal take on what's going on. That's what you need to kind of figure out, right? So that's something to think about. Next, we're moving on to the acting performance. That is towards the beginning of the film, and that's the father with his son that he calls Little Man. Talking about the film in general, there are 8 characters in the film, right? It's a pretty small cast, and they're all kind of in this house and in this area, the whole film. Erland Josephson, that's the lead actor. That guy plays the dad. Erland is a well-known Swedish actor. He had 72 credits to his name as an actor. He worked with Ingmar Bergman, who's also a critically acclaimed filmmaker, Tarkovsky, and then there's a third one that I can't remember the name of, that he was well known for working with as well. And he's the one who kind of guides this cast, right? He's the lead actor. It's his story that we're telling. He's the protagonist. Although it doesn't feel like a traditional, it's not definitely a hero's journey, which would be a traditional protagonist journey in a film. The closest we've seen to that is Slumdog Millionaire. And he's a true hero on a hero's journey. It's just told out of order, right? So things to think about in this movie. Are they believable? Are the actors believable within the structure of this film, right? With the dialogue being like it is, does it feel forced? Or are they doing a great job with it, right? I believe they do, because this is complex dialogue, and it never really feels forced. It feels like they're just people having a conversation, and this is how they talk. So that's one of the things to kind of look into and read into when you're looking at the movie. Try to decipher that, and then figure out for yourself: do the actors feel realistic, or are anybody melodramatic? Is anybody kind of overacting? Are there moments of overacting in the movie? Right. So that's something that you should be trying to pull out of the movie as well. Next up, we're going to talk editing. Now, this is a pretty short one because it's pretty simple the way this film was laid out. First thing up there, color desaturation. We talked about it in cinematography, but it's a post-production editing process. So I just wanted you to understand that color desaturation, sucking out the color and then putting it back in, is something that gets done in the post-production / editing phase of the film. It's nothing they did on set with the camera or anything like that. It has to be done in post-production. And then also the idea of just fewer cuts because of longer takes. That's just the style he was making the movie in. So there isn't a lot going on editing wise. It's just there to serve the purpose to have Tarkovsky tell the story the way he wants to tell a story. And finally, we're talking about sound design. But real quick, while we're on this image, I want you to see we talked about triangles in composition and shapes in composition. Here's an upside down triangle that's kind of tilted on its side right here. So you got a point from one guy standing up to the other guy sitting down to the girl sitting in front. So it's kind of an upside down little triangle that kind of goes like this, right? There's an upside down triangle. So you'll see shapes in Tarkovsky compositions as well. And again, an upside down triangle means it's teetering on its point, so it's a very precarious situation. And that's partly what you find in this particular movie. Now, talking about sound design in general, the opening and the closing have this classical music, right? It's Bach's Have Mercy, My God. It's got a different name in a different language, but the translation is Have Mercy, My God, which is pretty fitting for the story, right? One of the things that happens is the father figure gets down on his knees and prays to God, says, I'll give up this and I'll give up that and I'll give up this if you save us all. So he's trying to kind of, just make a deal with God, right? And so that's fitting that the song is that it gets us into the movie and it gets us out of the film. The soundtrack also features a Japanese flute. I can't pronounce what that's called, a shakuhachi. I don't know, probably butchered that to death. But it's this classic featured Japanese flute. It's also a flute that's popped up in early China as well. And you'll hear that as part of the soundtrack for a lot of the film as well. But in general, the movie is a very quiet film. Okay, you hear little clocks ticking in the background, you hear wind, you hear some birds, noises like that, very subtle ones that kind of drive the tempo of the story without a lot of music, without a lot of it's just, again, you'll notice it's a very quiet film, except there are a couple moments where these military jets are flying by very close. You never see the jets, but you definitely hear it and you feel it. And again, that's by design. We have all these quiet moments, but then you have the distressing sound of these fighter jets with their nuclear weapons about to do what they're going to do. Okay? So understand, we're looking at something that's very silent, very quiet, very slow moving, with very complex dialogue. And then it runs for 2 hours and 40 minutes. So there's a lot going on here. So please just take a peek at it and try to observe it and enjoy it and take it in. The cinematic terms for this particular module: the oneer. Again, that's the one-shot master shot that shoots out a whole entire scene without any cuts. The moving master shot. The moving master is the moving main shot of a scene that we cut in and cut back to, cut out of and cut back to. But it's really just the same shot, and we just keep kind of getting to something closer and then coming back to that shot. Monologue. A monologue is just a long speech by an actor or in a play or a film, and you'll definitely see some monologues. Visual motifs. So again, those are reoccurring patterns through prop, set design, costumes, symbols, and events to support the intended theme of the story, right? And in this particular film, we see levitation, we see water near fire, we see reflections, and we see dreams. Those are some of the motifs that he uses in this film. And then naturalism in the cinematography. So naturalism being, I just want to photograph what's there and photograph that beauty, and I'm not going to try to make it cinematic. I'm just going to capture what's in front of me. So those are the cinematic terms for this week. I apologize, this video is a little bit long, but it all needed to be said. This is a quality film. Please give it a chance.